Sawadee-Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group, and we're studying the words of the Buddha in volume 11 of our book series. This book is titled The Realms of Existence. We're going to be exploring chapters 51 through 60 today. The way that we do this program is I invite students in Zoom to be able to read a chapter. After someone reads a chapter, then I'll share some teachings on that. And then I'm going to open up to any and all questions that you have, whether you're in Facebook, YouTube, or in Zoom. You can put your questions in the comment section, or in Zoom, you can raise your hand electronically. So I'd like to welcome all of you, whether you're joining for the first time or you're joining regularly, and then invite anybody who's in Zoom to be able to read this first chapter. Is there anyone in Zoom who would like to read this first chapter? Okay, looks like Samantha. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. Chapter 51, Consciousness Conditions Name and Form. I have said consciousness conditions name and form, and this is the way that should be understood, Ananda. If consciousness were not to come into the mother's womb, would name and form develop there? No, Venerable Sir. Or if consciousness, having entered the mother's womb, were to be deflected, would name and form come to birth in this life? No, Venerable Sir. And if the consciousness of such a tender young being, boy or girl, were cut thus out off, would name and form grow, develop, and mature? No, Venerable Sir. Therefore, Ananda, just this, namely consciousness, is the root, the cause, the origin, the condition of name and form. I have said name and form conditions consciousness, and this is the way that should be understood, Ananda. If consciousness did not find a resting place in name and form, would there subsequently be an arising and coming to be of birth, aging, death, and discontentedness? No, Venerable Sir. Therefore, Ananda, this, namely name and form, is the root, the cause, the origin, the condition of consciousness. Thus far then, Ananda, we can trace birth and decay, death and falling into other states, and being reborn. Thus far extends the way of designation. Thus far extends the way of concepts. Thus far is the sphere of understanding. Thus far the round goes as far as can be discerned in this life, namely to name and form together with consciousness.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. So this chapter, like many of the chapters that we're starting to get into, are based on having understood other aspects of the teachings of the Buddha. And here the Buddha is really narrowing in on a certain aspect of dependent origination and helping you to understand the cycle of rebirth and the real core of it. So here he's saying at the beginning that consciousness, which is the mind, conditions name and form. Name and form is the physical body. So what he's saying is that because there's a consciousness, now that comes into the physical body. That's what name and form is. If you see the way the Buddha describes what name and form is, it's essentially the physical body. So he's basically talking about the coming together of the mind and the physical body. And he's saying, okay, this is the way it should be understood. And if you've studied and penetrated into dependent origination, then you understand that. So now the Buddha, being a real master at the way that he teaches, he actually asks questions of his students to be able to help them to be able to rise up this wisdom in the mind to be able to understand the path to enlightenment. So he says, if consciousness were not to come into the mother's womb, would name and form develop there? What he's saying is, would the body of this individual being, if the consciousness didn't come into the womb, would it continue to grow and develop? And the answer is no, Venerable Sir, right? Because there needs to be a consciousness with this physical body in order for this physical body to continue to grow and develop. So there needs to be a mind in the physical body. Or if consciousness, having entered the mother's womb, were to be deflected, would name and form come to birth in this very life, right? So if the consciousness was coming in, but for whatever reason it wasn't absorbed into the physical matter that was going to make up the physical body, would this being essentially come into existence, come into this birth? And the answer is no, of course not. Then, and if consciousness of such a tender young being, boy or girl, were thus cut off, would name and form grow, develop, and mature? And the answer is no, Venerable Sir. So say that the consciousness or the mind came into this particular physical body, but let's just say it was cut off for whatever reason. Let's just say there was a termination of pregnancy. Would this being continue to grow, develop, and mature? The answer is no. Therefore, Ananda, just this, namely consciousness, is the root, the cause, the origin that conditions name and form. So he's helping you to be able to see that without a mind, this physical body can't go on. And then he just repeats what he taught initially, which is name and form conditions consciousness. So these two things are coming together, right? He's showing you both directions. Consciousness conditions name and form conditions consciousness. These two things coming together is what essentially creates the being. Then he says, if consciousness did not find a resting place in name and form, would there subsequently be an arising and coming to be of birth? Meaning, would this being be born? And the answer, of course, is no. If it wasn't born, would it age? No. Would it experience death? No. Would it experience any discontentedness? No. So it's the consciousness coming into the physical body that's going to allow these subsequent events to occur. And that's where you can understand the Buddha here in a moment. He's going to kind of connect this to rebirth, because the ultimate goal of this path is to purify the mind so that the causes and conditions that are producing discontentedness no longer continue, but also the causes and conditions that produce rebirth no longer continue either. So he says, therefore, Ananda, just this, namely name and form, is the root, the cause, the origin that conditions consciousness. So thus far then, Ananda, we can trace birth and decay, death, and falling into other states in being reborn. Right? So you can see exactly what the cause is here. And if you understand dependent origination, there's actually two causes that lead to a consciousness, right? There's ignorance and volitional formations that leads to consciousness. But he's really penetrating in here to kind of show this one aspect of dependent origination. So he's saying, okay, so we can discern this. We can understand why rebirth continues to occur. That's what he's saying here. All right. Any questions on this chapter? Remember, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, I'm just going to check on all of our platforms here. Okay, I don't see any questions. Okay, so we'll move into this next chapter. Would somebody like to read chapter 52? Okay, Vibhav.
Thank you. Union and disengagement concerning femininity and masculinity. Monks, I will teach you a discourse on union and disengagement. Listen, and what is the discourse on union and disengagement? A woman, monks, attends internally to a feminine faculty, her feminine behavior, her feminine appearance, her feminine aspect, her feminine desire, her feminine voice, her feminine decoration. She becomes excited by these and takes delight in them. Excited by them, taking delight in them, she attends externally to a man's masculine faculty, his masculine behavior, his masculine appearance, his masculine aspect, his masculine desire, his masculine voice, his masculine decoration. She becomes excited by these and takes delight in them. Excited by them, taking delight in them, she desires union externally, and she also desires the pleasure and joy that arises on account of such union. Beings who are delighted with their femininity enter upon union with men. It is in this way that a woman does not transcend her femininity. A man, monks, attends internally to his masculine faculty, his masculine behavior, his masculine appearance, his masculine aspect, his masculine desire, his masculine voice, his masculine decoration. He becomes excited by these and takes delight in them. Excited by them, taking delight in them, he attends externally to a woman's feminine faculty, her feminine behavior, her feminine appearance, her feminine aspect, her feminine desire, her feminine voice, her feminine decoration. He becomes excited by these and takes delight in them. Excited by them, taking delight in them, he desires union externally, and he also desires the pleasure and joy that arises on account of such union. Beings who are delighted with their masculinity enter upon union with women, but it is in this way that a man does not transcend his masculinity. This is how union comes about. And how does disengagement come about? A woman, monks, does not attend internally to her feminine faculty, her feminine behavior, her feminine appearance, her feminine aspect, her feminine desire, her feminine voice, her feminine decoration. She does not become excited by these or take delight in them. Not excited by them, not taking delight in them. She does not attend externally to a man's masculine faculty, his masculine behavior, his masculine appearance, his masculine aspect, masculine desire, his masculine voice, his masculine decoration. She does not become excited by these or take delight in them. Not excited by them or not taking delight in them. She does not desire union externally, nor does she desire the pleasure and joy that arise on account of such union. Beings who are not delighted with their femininity become disengaged from men. It is in this way that a woman transcends her femininity. A man, monks, does not attend internally to his masculine faculty, his masculine behavior, his masculine appearance, his masculine aspect, his masculine desire, his masculine voice, his masculine decoration. He does not become excited by these or take delight in them. Not excited by them, not taking delight in them, he does not attend externally to a woman's feminine faculty, her feminine behavior, her feminine appearance, her feminine aspect, her feminine desire, her feminine voice, her feminine decoration. He does not become excited by these or take delight in them. Not excited by them, not taking delight in them, he does not desire union externally, nor does he desire the pleasure and joy that arise on account of such union. Beings who are not delighted with their masculinity become disengaged from women. It is in this way that a man transcends his masculinity. This is how disengagement comes about. This, monks, is a teaching discourse on union and disengagement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vibhav. So here, the first part, the Buddha is talking about a man and a woman coming together in sexual contact, that they would end up having a relationship and having sexual contact together. This is opposite gender relationships that he's talking about here in this first part of the discourse. Down here, he's talking about individuals who don't have that same interest, that don't have that interest in opposite gender relationships, but instead, potentially, they have same gender relationships, potentially. He doesn't specifically say that exactly, but we can see that that's essentially what he's alluding to, right? So this is where you can see that the Buddha was well aware of same gender relationships during his lifetime. But when we look at the teaching on sexual misconduct, you don't see the Buddha talk about it as sexual misconduct because there isn't any harm involved in two loyal, loving, consenting adults choosing to have sex, whether they're opposite gender or same gender. They're not actually causing any harm to anyone. So you can see that he was aware of these things, but he doesn't really teach anything other than to make people aware that these are the things that happen in life. He's helping people see the way the world is, not the way the world should be, but the way the world is. And when we understand the universal truth of impermanence, we can understand that same gender relationships have been going on ever since the beginning of time. Since the beginning of humanity, there's never been a time where every single person had sex with of the opposite gender. That would be permanence. So we never have seen that ever in history. So here we can see 2,500 years ago, the Buddha talking about this essentially. But yet when we look at the precept on sexual misconduct, we don't see anything related to that because there's no harm. And this is how wise this individual was 2,500 years ago to be able to have this level of insight, where today there's plenty of people in the world that don't understand this. So let me know if you guys have any questions on this chapter. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or in Zoom. Okay, it looks like Samantha has a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
Hi, Teacher David. This is just a general question on sexuality. Mm-hmm. As far as attaining enlightenment, I understand we have to eliminate sexual conduct. I'm wondering why that is. Is it possible to engage in sexual conduct and not have, say, attachment to it, or have, discontentedness with good feelings or bad feelings, or neither? Like, can it just be a way of showing affection to someone, or is that still in some way having a pleasurable feeling?
Yeah, the whole purpose behind sexual intercourse or sexual activity is to have some kind of pleasant feelings. We're having contact with the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind itself. All 6 sense bases are involved. And now there's this heightened sense of pleasure in the mind. And ultimately, the highest ultimate, outcome of that is an orgasm, where the mind has had such stimulation that the body experiences an orgasm with the pleasant feelings. And there's no other purpose, essentially. I mean, I know people talk about intimacy and closeness, and people even call it making love. This isn't actually true. What we're really doing is we're stimulating each other's senses when we have sexual activity, and taking the mind to that heightened sense of pleasure. And we typically do this with people who we're very close to, but of course, sometimes people don't do that. There's like one night stands and things like this, but there is no way to do that activity for any other outcome. Where, like a piece of chocolate cake, people usually get conditioned pleasant feelings with eating a piece of chocolate cake. But you can actually train your mind to eat this piece of chocolate cake and not get conditioned pleasant feelings, where you can enjoy it, but you don't have any conditioned pleasant feelings. But sexual activity is one of those rare things that you can't actually do that. You can't train the mind to not experience those conditioned pleasant feelings. If there was, I would have definitely figured it out. I'd be happy to report that to everybody. But unfortunately, there isn't any way to do that. And as long as there's that craving for sexual activity, there's going to be some level of discontentedness. Because, I'm sure you've experienced where you maybe had a partner for a period of time, and then you didn't have a partner, and there was some agitation and irritation and annoyance in the mind, because the mind really wanted this sexual activity and it couldn't get it for whatever reason. And that's the reason why the mind can't experience permanent peace and permanent joy, because the mind still has that longing, yearning for contact through the body or any other senses to get that heightened sense of pleasure. And oftentimes people turn to sex as a way of getting to something that feels somewhat comfortable. If you've ever been in a relationship where you guys argued and you were upset, and then you had sex in order to kind of like get back to pleasant feelings, and it just keeps the cycle going. So as long as there's the craving for sexual activity, which is a craving for pleasant feelings, then the mind isn't going to experience permanent peace and permanent joy.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. There is something better than sex, though. It's called enlightenment. All right, looks like we don't have any other questions. We'll go down to the next one. Maybe Vibhav has a question here. Do you have a question, Vibhav?
Yeah, I was just wondering if this discourse is just about, as you said, it's about saying that sometimes women or men do not feel attracted to the same sex, or is it about saying that they maybe just disengage from each other because they have transcended their feelings, or eliminated discontentedness?
You can also look at it as transcending the desire for sexual activity, right? You can look at it from that perspective as well.
Okay, thank you.
Would someone like to read this chapter? This is chapter 53. Okay, it looks like Tonka. I'm probably going to, actually, you know what? If you'd like to read the whole thing, this is a very long chapter. It's about 5 pages long. If you'd like to read the whole chapter, you're welcome to. But if at any point you'd like to kind of do a tag team with somebody, just let us know that you're ready to switch, because it's pretty long.
Sure, it would be nice to share it.
Sure. You just stop at like maybe 2 pages, 2.5 pages, whatever you'd like.
Okay, thank you. Why human beings are seen to be unwholesome and wholesome. Then the Brahman student Sukha son went to perfectly enlightened one and exchanged greetings with him. When this courtesies and friendly talk was finished, he sat down at one side and asked the perfectly enlightened one, Master Gotama, what is the cause and condition why human beings are seen to be unwholesome and wholesome? For people are seen to be short-lived and long-lived, sickly and healthy, ugly and beautiful, uninfluential and influential, poor and wealthy, low-born and high-born, and wise and wise. What is the cause and condition, Master Gotama, why human beings are seen to be unwholesome and wholesome? Student, beings are owners of their actions, heirs of their actions. They originate from their actions, are bound to their actions, have their actions as their refuge. It is action that distinguishes beings as wholesome and wholesome. I do not understand in detail the meaning of Master Gotama's statement, which he spoke in brief without expounding the meaning in detail. It would be good if Master Gotama would teach me the teaching so that I might understand in detail the meaning of Master Gotama's statement. Then, student, listen and attend closely to what I shall say. Yes, sir, the Brahman student Sudha replied. The perfectly enlightened one said this. Here, student, some man or woman kills living beings and is murderous, bloody-handed, gives the blows and violence, merciless to living beings. Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body, after that, he reappears in a state without basic necessities, in an unhappy destination, in perdition, even in hell. But if one, the dissolution on the body after that, he does not reappear in a state without basic necessities, in an unhappy destination, in perdition, in hell, but instead comes back to the human state. Then, wherever he is reborn, he is short-lived. This is the way, student, that leads to short life, namely one kills living beings and is murderous, bloody-handed, given to blows and violence, merciless to living beings. But here, students, some man or woman abandoning the killing of living beings, absent from killing living beings, with rod and weapon laid aside, gentle and kindly, he resides, compassionate to all living beings. Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body, after that, he reappears in a happy destination, even in the heavenly world. But if on the dissolution of the body, after that, he does not reappear in a happy destination in the heavenly world, but instead comes back to the human state, then whenever he is reborn, he is long-lived. This is the way, student, that leads to long life, namely abandoning the killing of living beings. One abstains from killing living beings with rod and weapon laid aside, gentle and kindly. One resides, compassionate to all living beings. Here, students, some man and woman is given to injuring being with the hand, with a club, with stick, or with knife. Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body, after that, he reappears in a state without basic necessities, in an unhappy destination, in perdition, even in hell. But if instead he comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is sickly. This is the way, student, that leads to sickness, namely one is given to injuring being with a hand, with clod, with stick, or with knife. But here, student, some man or woman is not given to injuring beings with a hand, with a clod, with a stick, or with knife. Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body, after that he reappears in a happy destination in the heavenly world. But if instead he comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is healthy. This is the way, student, that leads to healthy, namely one in not given to injuring beings with a hand, with a clod, with stick, or with a knife. Here, student, some man or woman is on an angry and irritable character. Even when criticized a little, he is offended, becomes angry, hostile, and resentful, and displays anger, hate, and bitterness. Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body after death, he reappears in a state without basic necessities, in an unhappy destination, in perdition, even in hell. But if instead he comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is ugly.
You like
This is the way.
Go ahead.
This is the way, student, that leads to ugliness, namely one of an angry and irritable character. Even when criticized a little, he is offended, becomes angry, hostile, and resentful, and displays anger, hate, and bitterness. But here, student, some man or woman is not of an angry and irritable character. Even when criticized a little, he is not offended, does not become angry, hostile, and resentful, and does not display anger, hate, and bitterness. Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body after death, he reappears in a happy destination, in the heavenly world. But if instead he comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is beautiful. This is the way, student, that leads to being beautiful, namely one is not of an angry and irritable character. Even when criticized a little, he is not offended, does not become angry, hostile, and resentful, and does not display anger, hate, and bitterness. Here, student, some man or woman is jealous, one who is selfish, resentful, and feels bitter about the gains, honor, respect, appreciation, salutations, and veneration received by others. Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body after death, he reappears in a state without basic necessities, in an unhappy destination, in perdition, even in. But if instead he comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is uninfluential. This is the way, student, that leads to being uninfluential, namely one is jealous, resentful, and feels bitter toward the gains, honor, respect, appreciation, salutations, and veneration received by others. But here, student, some man or woman is not jealous, one who is not selfish, resentful, and feels bitter about the gains, honor, respect, appreciation, salutation, and veneration received by others. Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body after death, he reappears in a happy destination, in the heavenly world. But if instead he comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is influential. This is the way, student, that leads to being influential, namely one is not jealous, resentful, and feels bitter toward the gains, honor, respect, appreciation, salutations, and veneration received by others. Here, student, some man or woman does not give food, drink, clothing, carriages, garlands, scents, ointments, beds, dwelling, and lamps to ascetics or Brahmins. Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body after death, he reappears in a state without basic necessities, in perdition, even in hell. instead he comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is poor. This is the way, student, that leads to poverty, namely one does not give food, drink, clothing, carriages, garlands, scents, ointments, beds, dwelling, and lamps to ascetics and Brahmins. But here, students, some men or women given food, drink, clothing, carriages, garlands, scents, ointments, beds, dwelling, or Brahmins, because of and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body after death, he reappears in a happy destination in the heavenly world. But if instead he comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is wealthy. This is the way, student, that leads to wealth, namely one gives food, drink, clothing, carriages, garlands, scents, ointments, beds, dwelling, and lamps to ascetics and Brahmins. Here, student, some man or woman is stubborn and arrogant. He does not pay homage, respect to one who should receive homage. Respect does not rise up for one in whose presence he should rise up, does not offer a seat to one who deserves a seat, does not make way for one for whom he should make way, and does not honor, respect, appreciate, and venerate one who should be honored, respected, appreciated, and venerated. Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body, after that he reappears in a state without basic necessities, in perdition, even in hell. But if instead he comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is low-born. This is the way, student, that leads to low birth, namely one is stubborn and arrogant. He does not pay homage, respect to one who should receive homage, respect, does not rise up for one in whose presence he should rise up, does not offer a seat to one who deserves a seat, does not make way for one for whom he should make way, and does not honor, respect, appreciate, and venerate one who should be honored, respected, appreciated, and venerated. But here, student, some man or woman is not stubborn and arrogant. He pays homage, respect to one who should receive homage, respect, rises up for one in whose presence he should rise up, offers a seat to one who deserves a seat, makes way for one for whom he should make way, and honors, respects, appreciates, and venerates one who should be honored, respected, appreciated, and venerated. Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body, after that he reappears in a happy destination in the heavenly world. But if instead he comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is high-born. This is the way, student, that leads to high birth, namely one is not stubborn and arrogant. He pays homage to one who should receive homage, rises up for one in whose presence he should rise up, offers a seat to one who deserves a seat, makes way for one for whom he should make way, and honors, respects, appreciates, and venerates one who should be honored, respected, appreciated, and venerated. Here, students, some man or woman does not visit an ascetic or a Brahmin and ask, "Venerable sir, what is wholesome? What is unwholesome? What is blamable? And what is blameless? What should be cultivated? What should not be cultivated? What kind of action will lead to my harm and discontentedness for a long time? What kind of action will lead to my welfare and peacefulness for a long time?" Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body, after that he reappears in a state without basic necessities and perdition, even in hell. But if instead he comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is unwise. This is the way, student, that leads to being unwise, namely one does not visit an ascetic or Brahmin and ask such questions. But here, students, a man or woman visit an ascetic or Brahmin and asks, "Venerable sir, what is wholesome? What is unwholesome? What is blamable? What is blameless? What should be cultivated? What should not be cultivated? What kind of action will lead to my harm and discontentedness for a long time? What kind of action will lead to my welfare and peacefulness for a long time? Because of performing and undertaking such action on the dissolution of the body, after that he reappears in a happy destination, in a heavenly world. But if instead he comes back to the human state, then wherever he is reborn, he is wise. This is the way, student, that leads to wisdom, namely one visits an ascetic or Brahmin and asks such questions. Thus, student, the way that leads to short life makes people short-lived. The way that leads to long life makes people long-lived. The way that leads to sickliness makes people sickly. The way that leads to health makes people healthy. The way that leads to ugliness makes people ugly. The way that leads to being beautiful makes people beautiful. The way that leads to being uninfluential makes people uninfluential. The way that leads to being influential makes people influential. The way that leads to poverty makes people poor. The way that leads to wealth makes people wealthy. The way that leads to low birth makes people low born. The way that leads to high birth makes people high born. The way that leads to unwise makes people unwise. The way that leads to wisdom makes people wise. Beings are owners of their actions. Student, parents of their actions, they originate from their actions, are bound to their actions, have their actions as their refuge. It is action that distinguishes beings as unwholesome and wholesome. When this was said, the Brahmin student Sudha Todiya's son said to the perfectly enlightened one, "Magnificent Master Gotama, magnificent Master Gotama. Master Gotama has made the teachings clear in many ways, as though he were turning upright what had been overturned, revealing what was hidden, showing the way to one who was lost, or holding up a lamp in the dark for those with eyesight to see forms. I go to Master Gotama for refuge and to the teachings and to the community of monks. Let Master Gotama remember me as a household practitioner who has gone to him for refuge for life."
All right. Thank you, Tonka. You read the whole thing. I think Yihang was offering to help you out there. Maybe you can read the next one, Yihang. So yeah, this is a pretty long discourse, but there's some that the Buddha teaches that are even longer than this, that the Buddha is notorious for having these very long discourses. And as much as it takes us to actually read these, can you imagine actually having this in your mind and actually speaking it? It takes a lot of wisdom, a lot of focus, a lot of concentration to read it, but it would take even a higher degree of that to actually speak it originally. So this is where when I read these kinds of things, I'm like, wow, the Buddha was surely enlightened to be able to speak all of that so clearly, so concisely, and so precisely. So here, what the Buddha is doing is helping a student who's asked him how to discern how an individual is considered to be unwholesome or wholesome. And the Buddha goes through various things here, and he's actually talking about it in relationship to certain things that you're doing in your day-to-day life. And then he talks about how certain things will lead to rebirth either in hell or the heavenly realm. And that's why it's in this book, because this is all about the realms of existence, and we're in the section of human beings. So it's important to understand that everything the Buddha is teaching in one way or another is coming back to the natural law of karma, of cause and effect, or action and result. The Buddha sets that up right here at the beginning when he's first asked the question, and he talks just kind of very generally. He talks about the natural law of karma, about how we basically are experiencing whatever it is that we make decisions about. That's what we're experiencing on a day-to-day basis, is based on our own actions, that we're going to then experience certain results, because there's certain decisions that we make that lead to certain results, either wholesome or unwholesome. If we're making decisions wisely, we'll experience wholesome results or wholesome karma. And if we make decisions unwisely, we'll experience unwholesome results or unwholesome karma. But then the student was interested to go into this in more detail. So that's what the Buddha did. He went into it in more detail down here. So when the Buddha is talking about this moral conduct that leads to rebirth either in hell or the heavenly realm, the way that this is occurring is through the pollution of your own mind. Because in order to, for example, this first one, to kill and be murderous, there needs to be a certain amount of craving, anger, and ignorance in the mind. These are the three poisons, or the three unwholesome roots. They need to be quite high in order to go out there and be actively killing living beings. And now at the point of death, this being can potentially be reborn into the hell realm. But if, for example, they do come back to the human realm, then they're going to be short-lived. This helps you to be able to understand individuals who die very early in life and why that is. That the Buddha is describing that here. He's helping you to be able to see this cause and effect, or action and result. But then individuals who aren't doing that, that means that there is less craving, anger, and ignorance in the mind. So therefore, this individual is experiencing a long life. The way that this occurs is not through anything mystical or magical. It's actually occurring because the mind is essentially like the CPU of the computer. A CPU of a computer is the central processing unit. And if the CPU is, malfunctioning or somehow defective, then the health of the computer is not going to be very good. In fact, the computer might just completely give out. Right? Whereas if the CPU is well taken care of and it's well constructed, then this computer can last for a very long time. So your mind is the CPU. It's the central processing unit of everything you experience. It goes through the mind. So if you have a lot of pollution in your mind, then there's going to be a lot of discontentedness. It's not that you're just killing and causing harm to other beings, but there's all kinds of discontentedness in the mind because there's a high degree of craving, anger, and ignorance. And now with that high degree of craving, anger, and ignorance and significant amounts of discontentedness, that puts stress on the physical body. So now there's going to be a shorter lifespan. But then consequently and conversely, if an individual has depleted their craving, anger, and ignorance to a certain degree, and there's not as much of that, that means there's not as much discontentedness in the mind, there's not as much stress on the internal organs of the body, so therefore this individual can live for a longer period of time. So it's not anything mystical or magical that's happening here. It's not like some being is overseeing your life and looking at your wholesome and unwholesome moral conduct and deciding whether you live for a long time or not. It's your own decisions that are leading to that particular result. And the Buddha goes through multiple things here to be able to help you see this cause and effect. And the way that you can use a discourse like this is because, as you know, the Buddha never tries to guilt, shame, or fear you into doing anything by threatening rebirth in the human realm or in the hell realm, or by holding out a carrot and dangling it for you to do something good or beneficial to be reborn in heaven, because those aren't the goals of this path. The goal of this path is to get to enlightenment and escape the whole cycle of rebirth. The Buddha's not going to use guilt, shame, and fear in order to convince somebody to eliminate guilt, shame, and fear. In fact, a Buddha isn't trying to convince anybody of anything. They've already figured out how to get to enlightenment. Their mind's already peaceful and joyful. They're just sharing with people what it took for them to get to that mental state. So what the Buddha's doing here is helping you to be able to see this cause and effect in the way that you can use a discourse like this, because you're not scared of hell and you're not longing, yearning for the heavenly realm, but instead you can look at the various qualities that he's talking about in order for you to practice these qualities or to eliminate certain qualities. So of course, the first one, he's talking about killing living beings. This is one that you learn as part of the 5 precepts, right? And then he goes on to talking about injuring beings, right? So we can understand that because that leads to sickliness or rebirth in one of these realms like hell. Then he goes on to talk about having an angry, irritable character, that even when criticized a little, this individual is offended, becomes hostile and resentful, right? Those are things that you would like to eliminate from your practice. Then he talks about down here, an individual who's jealous, selfish, resentful about others gain honor, respect, appreciation, salutations, and veneration, right? So these are things that you would like to eliminate. This is essentially practicing sympathetic joy, where you see somebody experiencing something beneficial and you can have joy for their success, even if you didn't contribute to it. And just like with the one about the shorter life or longer life, all of these are experiencing cause and effect. So this one up here, where the Buddha is talking about someone who's angry and irritable character and gets offended with anger and hostility, that this individual essentially is being reborn ugly, right? Well, you can see that when you're angry and you're hostile and you're bitter, if you've ever looked in the mirror, you look very ugly, right? But then when your mind is quite peaceful and joyful and you don't have stress and all these discontent feelings, your mind is uplifted, it's bright, it's cheerful, it's glad. You'll notice a bit of beauty in your facial complexion, right? So this is the cause and effect, where you can see how the mind is that CPU and then it's producing a certain effect. And you can just go through a discourse like this and pull out all of these different things that the Buddha is talking about. Down here, he's talking about practicing generosity towards ascetics and Brahmins. You know, you probably don't come in contact with Brahmins, but there's plenty of ascetics in the world where you would like to give gifts, because this is helping to train your mind to eliminate craving, desire, attachment, right? And then I think that's kind of one of the last ones. Yeah, it's kind of one of the last ones here. So you can kind of see how you can use a discourse like this to walk through it and be able to see what would be wise or unwise. Here he's talking about asking questions of someone, of what's wholesome or unwholesome, blamable or blameless, what you should cultivate, and what kinds of things lead to harm, right? So you can use these discourses like this, because the Buddha is never, ever guilt shaming and fearing you about the lower realms, and he's not ever holding out a carrot to try to incentivize you to be reborn in any particular realm like heaven, because that's not the goal of his teachings. So let me know if you guys have questions on this discourse. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom if you like. So it looks like Samantha has a question here in Zoom. It says, is perdition a part of hell realm? The way that I understand this, and this is kind of like a Christian word, I think, is that there's kind of like an intermediary area between going from like a human realm to hell. There's kind of like an intermediary area, which is kind of leading towards hell, but the mind is not yet in hell yet. That's the way that I understand this perdition. Okay, so I don't see any other questions anywhere. So I'm going to move on now. Thank you again, Tonka, for reading that one. Yihang, would you like to read this next one, chapter 54? All right, go for it.
Thank you, Teacher David. Duty of a noble wheel-turning monarch. The perfectly enlightened one spoke about a wheel-turning monarch of long, long ago. These conversations between the consecrated Katia king, son, and the king Dahanami, father. But what, sir, is the duty of a noble wheel-turning monarch? It is this, my son, yourself depending on the teachings, honoring it, revering it, cherishing it, doing homage, respect to it, and venerating it, having the teachings as your badge and banner, not acknowledging the teachings as your master. You should establish guard, security, and protection according to the teachings for your own household, your troops, your nobles, and your royal subordinates, vassals. For Brahmins and householders, town and country folk, ascetics and Brahmins, for beasts and birds. Let no crime exist in your kingdom, and to those who are in need, give property. And whatever ascetics and Brahmins in your kingdom have renounced the life of sensual desire, obsession, and are devoted to patient mental discipline and gentleness, each one taming himself, each one claiming himself, and each one striving for the end of craving. For from time to time, you should go to them and consult them as to what is wholesome and what is unwholesome, what is blameworthy and what is blameless, what is to be followed and what is not to be followed, and what action will in the long run lead to harm and sorrow, and what to welfare and peacefulness. Having listened to them, you should avoid the evil, unwholesome, and do what is wholesome. That, my son, is the duty of a noble wheel-turning monarch. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Yihang. So this is a father who's a king talking to his son, who's also a king, and he's giving him guidance of essentially how to be a wheel-turning monarch. This is where you can understand what is a wheel-turning monarch, which I've talked about before, where a wheel-turning monarch is an individual who's in a leadership role, overseeing a certain population of people, but they're using the teachings of the Buddha as their guide in what they do and how they kind of manage or how they, kind of help this particular population of people. During the lifetime of the Buddha, this was essentially kings and queens and people like this, where today we might actually extend this definition beyond that to, of course, presidents, prime ministers, but even like a boss of a company, right? Or even like a mother and father of a home, right? You're leading a certain population of people. And if you guide your decision making based on the teachings of the Buddha, this is going to help you to be able to guide this population of people, but it's also going to help this population of people to be able to see the teachings very clearly. So there's the opportunity for you to be able to learn the teachings and then use them in your day-to-day life and guide your decision making. And as a wheel-turning monarch, the Buddha looked at these people favorably because they were able to influence the sharing of his teachings to a large population of people. If you had a kingdom of 50,000 people or 100,000 people or even 5 or 10,000 people, and you kind of oversaw that population or that kingdom through these teachings, those individuals would end up kind of indirectly learning these teachings through seeing how the king is making these decisions on a day-to-day basis. And that's what this father is guiding his son to be able to do. This Khattiya population was a population of people who were considered to actually be practicing the teachings and very prosperous. And they were even practicing the teachings before the Buddha actually started teaching them, because remember, these are natural laws. So people can kind of gain a certain amount of this wisdom on their own and through other means, not just through the teachings of the Buddha, but you can kind of understand like, yeah, it's unwise to lie, or it's unwise to kill or steal or things like this. You can kind of gain some of this wisdom along the way. So this population of Khattiyas were looked at by the Buddha as like a very prosperous and kind of ideal society to a certain degree. So this king who was overseeing this population would be wise to guide this population through the teachings of the Buddha, because then not only will this population of people be able to indirectly learn the teachings, but this king would be looked at very favorably, and the people in his kingdom would very much admire him for having done so. So let me know if you guys have questions on this, where you're learning about a wheel-turning monarch. Remember, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or in Zoom. Okay, it looks like Vibhav has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thanks, David. I was just wondering about, when you talked about the Khattiyas being like they were practicing the teaching very closely. My understanding is that the Khattiyas were basically the warrior class of people. That's what I've generally understood growing up. So they were probably like the rulers and the like, I guess they were like probably like, I mean, the warrior class of people probably being in wars or killing other people is my understanding, for not for like gain or anything, but at least protection and getting more land and stuff like that. So I was wondering how that matches up with like the idea that they were practicing the teaching very closely, when they were probably, because of the work they did, they were probably ended up like killing people.
Yeah, so when I say practicing the teachings closely, what I mean by that is closer than any other population in the area, because Of course, during this period of time, just to have a kingdom, there's a certain amount of defense that you would need to have because people were constantly trying to overthrow a king from one region to the other. That's how we had the consolidation of property and land in order to create the countries that we now have. So when the Buddha talks about the Khattiyas, you can see in other discourses where he talks about them very favorably about how they're practicing the teachings closely, the way that they interact in their day-to-day relationships. Sure, on the outside, they're going to have certain soldiers that are killing, but in terms of the way they interact with each other on a day-to-day basis, that's what the Buddha would praise.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I don't see any other questions anywhere. So now let's go to the next one, chapter 55. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, it looks like Vibhav and Samantha, so we'll just take them in order. Go ahead, Vibhav.
Beings bound by action. One is not a Brahmin by birth, nor by birth a non-Brahmin. By action is one a Brahmin, by action is one a non-Brahmin. For men are farmers by their axe, and by axe they are craftsmen too. And men are merchants by their axe, and by their axe are servants too. And men are robbers by their axe, and by their axe are soldiers too. And men are chaplains by their axe, and by their axe are rulers too. So that is how the truly wise see action as it really is, see dependent origination, skill in action and its results. Action makes the world go round, action makes the generation turn. Living beings are born by action, like the chariot wheel by the linchpin. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vibhav. So this is a discourse that the Buddha helps you to be able to see that the way that you conduct yourself in the world, that's what determines, what you're doing and what you're experiencing. Because during the lifetime of the Buddha, it was thought that it was based on your birth and where you were born that determined, kind of your outlook on life and who you were as a person. So he starts off here talking about Brahmin because this was a class of people that was thought that if you were born into this family, you were a holy person automatically, right? And the Buddha knew that this wasn't actually true. It's based on your actions and the decisions that you make. So he was helping people to be able to see that it's not based on where you're born and what family you're born into that determines, you as an individual, whether you're wholesome or unwholesome. It's based on your actions. So when he says one is not a Brahmin by birth, nor by birth a non-Brahmin, by action one is a Brahmin, by action is one a non-Brahmin, right? So what he's saying is it's not your birth that determines whether you're holy or not. That's not what determines that. It's based on your actions that determine that. And then he goes into other types of things to be able to help you to be able to see that, because ultimately the Buddha is teaching you to be wholesome and walk towards the light, and he's guiding you in how to do that. So that's why he's starting off this discourse in that way, but then he's helping you to see, like that's true in regards to farmers and craftsmen and merchants and servants and robbers and soldiers and chaplains and rulers and all these different things. It's true for all these things too. So it would also be true for whether you're wholesome or unwholesome, helping people to kind of see a perspective that they didn't understand at that time because their mind was maybe clinging to the perception that it's based on where you're born that determines what type of individual that you are. And then the Buddha goes on further and says, okay, this is the way the truly wise see it, is that it's action that determines what you experience on a particular situation. And it's our actions that lead to any particular result. And he uses this little analogy sometimes of a chariot wheel by a linchpin. If you know about a chariot and then there's a horse that's pulling it, the linchpin is what's keeping those two things together. Without the linchpin, the whole thing falls apart and it doesn't actually work, right? So the Buddha is explaining how our actions are the linchpin that determines what we experience on a day-to-day basis. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. The Buddha is helping you to be able to see that it's your actions that determine whether you're wholesome or unwholesome. Okay, looks like Tonka. Go ahead, ma'am.
Teacher David, it just reminded me of something that I was thinking recently. How to look at accidents. Like, even, for example, your recent accident with the motorcycle that you had. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm sure that you don't have unwholesome karma and you live almost perfect or even perfect moral life. but we as human beings still have accidents in our life. So how to explain that regarding cause and effect, that every effect has the cause? I have struggled a little bit there.
Sure. So it's always cause and effect. Everything you experience is always cause and effect. In saying that you have extinguished all your unwholesome karma and you will only experience wholesome karma when you're enlightened isn't to say nothing is ever going to happen opposite of what you would prefer to happen, right? You're still going to experience sickness, aging, death, loss, and destruction. These are the 5 unobtainables that no matter how well trained your mind is, how enlightened you are, you will still experience sickness, aging, death, loss, and destruction. So these things are unobtainable, and an individual will still experience those. And even when someone is experiencing them, it's cause and effect. There's still a cause and effect there. Even when their mind is enlightened, there's still a cause and effect. But an individual who's enlightened can look at a situation, let's just say a motorbike accident, and they can look at it and they can know for themselves, was there any craving? Was there any anger? And was there any ignorance involved in this particular accident? And if so, then we know that because we are acting upon craving, anger, and ignorance, then that's unwholesome karma. That is a result of what we're experiencing. And an individual could experience a motorbike accident, for example, and it be unwholesome karma. They could be drinking alcohol or drugs. They could be on their phone, for example. They could be looking around at the sights and not paying attention, having singleness of mind. And this could be unwholesome karma of a motorbike accident. But you could also have someone who's enlightened and who doesn't have any craving, anger, and ignorance and was fully aware of every last little aspect of what they were doing, and they could still get into an accident. So it's not that you would never experience an accident as an enlightened being. It's just that there wouldn't be any craving, anger, and ignorance involved, and you'd be able to look at it and be able to see that for yourself, where people on the outside looking in may not be able to see it. So that's why each individual situation that you encounter and that you experience, you need to look at it to be able to see, is there any craving and anger and ignorance in there that's led to this? And where you maybe are having challenges to see it, that's where you reach out to somebody that can see it and be able to help you to understand it. So sometimes when people hear me say there's no unwholesome karma for an enlightened being, they're only experiencing wholesome karma, they think that, oh, life just must be like a red carpet and everything's happening the way you want it to happen. And this isn't actually true. You're still experiencing impermanence, because that's what all those 5 things are based in: sickness, aging, death, loss, and destruction. It's just impermanence. So the difference here is that with an unenlightened being experiencing a motorbike accident, for example, there's going to be some craving, anger, and ignorance there that they've actually resulted in this motorbike accident. And now they're experiencing the effects of that and having made those unwise decisions. And now they're going to need to extinguish that and be able to make better decisions in the future through the cultivation of wisdom. With an enlightened being, they're not going to experience any discontentedness. That even though they're getting this in this motorbike accident, this unenlightened being who's experiencing the motorbike accident, they're going to experience discontentedness. They're going to experience sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, despair in the mind. Where this enlightened being, even though when they're getting into a motorbike accident, they're not experiencing any discontentedness. That's part of the unwholesome karma that one would experience in the unenlightened state, because they're still craving anger and ignorance in the mind. But for an enlightened being, they're not going to experience any discontentedness. They'll experience physical pain, but it'll be very muted and very minor. And then their mind will still be completely peaceful, joyful, glad, and uplifted, even with experiencing this motorbike accident, or, since we're using that as an example.
Okay, thank you, teacher.
Yeah, does that make sense to you, Tonka?
It does, because I didn't think about destruction and loss. It seems that it's part of human life, regardless of enlightenment and state of your mind. Sometimes it's just what happens.
Yeah. So you can have loss and destruction that is unwholesome karma, but you can also have loss and destruction and it's not unwholesome karma. Same thing with sickness, aging, and death. Someone could age very quickly if they're making a lot of unwise decisions, but they're still going to be aging for an enlightened being. And same thing with death. Someone could die based on unwholesome karma, based on unwise decisions that they made, but also an enlightened being is going to experience death as well. So it's not like, if there's an accident, it's absolutely unwholesome karma. And that's where each individual needs to have enough wisdom to be able to look at the decisions that are leading to any particular result so that they can figure out for themselves what is actually transpiring here, and that their mind is looking at it objectively, so that there isn't anything being missed. Because if you look at a situation subjectively, you might actually miss the unwise decisions that led to that, and now you don't cultivate the wisdom to ensure that those things don't happen again.
And I would assume if it's a result of our craving and unwholesome karma, it would be happening much more frequently.
Potentially, but an accident, you don't have direct control, right? Like I was even in the car that I had an accident about a month ago or 2 months ago. Somebody bumped into me. It was a very low speed accident at the mall. Somebody bumped into me. And scratched up the car, and it needed to be fixed, and it was covered by insurance. But you don't have control over that. You could be driving down the road, making all the wisest decisions, and someone could still hit you. And that doesn't mean that it's unwholesome karma necessarily, right? If you're not paying attention, if you're on the phone, you're listening to music, you're looking over here, looking over there, doing all these things, and you get in an accident, okay, there's some unwholesome karma. But you could also be doing everything 100% perfectly, driving down the road, and someone could still bump into you. But you're not going to cause an accident as an enlightened being, right? You're not going to be making unwise decisions that causes the accident.
If I may just make this point, it's been a long time ago, but I remember someone was bringing this topic, and that person had accident driving in the city, and it wasn't their fault. But you made a comment that it's still their karma because they chose to live in that busy city with that traffic, and that's why sometimes I have trouble understanding what is our personal karma and what is out of our control, and it's not always clear. Yeah,
everything we experience is karma. Every single thing, everything that we're experiencing is karma. But whether it's wholesome karma or unwholesome karma, you have to look at it more clearly, right? Getting into an accident, you can't say that this is wholesome karma, but you can't say that it's unwholesome karma either. You have to be able to look at what's actually transpiring. In my opinion, getting into the accident, it wasn't wholesome karma, but through my experience, I experienced something very beneficial there. As part of that whole situation, I actually got knocked unconscious, and I got to be able to see how the mind functioned, having been unconscious, and I was loopy for several hours after the accident. I could see how the mind was functioning, which I always thought an individual who would experience this would still be polite, kind, friendly, and respectful, and be practicing the teachings just fine. And that's actually what I was able to see and observe through that situation. So even if someone's sitting at a traffic light and someone runs into the back of them, it's still karma, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the unwholesome karma. That they made certain decisions that led to that accident, in terms of they chose to get into the car, they chose to drive down the street, they chose to stop at that traffic light. There's a cause and effect. There's actual decisions that lead to this, but it's not necessarily wholesome or unwholesome karma here. It's just karma in general, that it's just a result of decisions that were made.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay, let me see if we have any other questions anywhere. All right, I don't see any others. So let's go to the next one, which is chapter 56. Is there someone who would like to read this one? I think Samantha, there you go. Go ahead, ma'am.
The path leading to reappearance in accordance with one's objective. Monks, I shall teach you reappearance in accordance with one's objective. Listen and attend closely to what I shall say. Here, monks, a monk possesses confidence, virtue, learning, generosity, and wisdom. He thinks, oh, that on the dissolution of the body after death, I might reappear in the company of well-to-do nobles. He fixes his mind on that, determined upon it, develops it. These objectives and this effort of his, thus developed and cultivated, lead to his reappearance there. This, monks, is the path, the way that leads to reappearance there. Again, a monk possesses confidence, virtue, learning, generosity, and wisdom. He thinks, oh, that on the dissolution of the body after death, I might reappear in the company of well-to-do Brahmins. He fixes his mind on that, determined upon it, develops it. These objectives and this effort of his, thus developed and cultivated, lead to his reappearance there. This, monks, is the path, the way that leads to reappearance there. Again, a monk possesses confidence, virtue, learning, generosity, and wisdom. He thinks, oh, that on the dissolution of the body after death, I might reappear in the company of well-to-do householders. He fixes his mind on that, determined upon it, develops it. These objectives and this effort of his, thus developed and cultivated, lead to his reappearance there. This, monks, is the path, the way that leads to reappearance there.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. So as you guys have heard me share many times, and you know, the goal of the teachings of the Buddha is not to reappear anywhere, to not have rebirth anywhere. But if somebody's mind is longing, yearning, and wanting to reappear in a certain place, the mind will potentially experience that. It's not that, just automatically you can do anything and everything you would like to do in your life. And at the end of your life, you can think, oh, let me reappear here, and you magically will reappear there. Notice the Buddha is talking about having confidence, which is confidence in him and his teachings, in the community, having virtuous moral conduct, learning the teachings, having generosity, which means you've reduced your craving to a certain degree, and you have this wisdom that you've cultivated, eliminating the ignorance. Now, an individual who's practiced very closely, if they still have a craving and clinging, and they want to be reborn in a certain area, what the Buddha is saying is, okay, your mind's still holding on, there's the potential that you could be reborn in this particular group or population of people. But that's not the ultimate goal. He's just explaining what can occur, not what would be wise to actually do in this particular case. He's showing you this cause and effect between practicing the teachings and then the mind still craving and clinging, and how it can experience this rebirth. So any questions here on this one? Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere. So let's go to the next one. This one we're not going to actually read. This one's about 12 pages long. This is chapter 57 of volume 11. This is on knowledge of beginnings. This is where the Buddha explains his creation story of how the world came into existence. And if you'd like to read this, you can, because it's in our book series. You can download our books for free. You can take them and go print them. You can get them on Amazon, or you can get them here at the temple in Chiang Mai. So this is the creation story that the Buddha shares. If you guys have read this and you have questions, feel free to let me know. But as you can see here, it's a very, very long discourse. But once again, you can really appreciate the clarity of the Buddha's mind here. Actually, it's not 12 pages here, but in the original book that I got it from, it actually is about 12 pages. So does anybody have any questions on this particular chapter? Okay, I don't see any questions here. And by the way, one thing I'll share here is you actually don't need to know this in order to be able to get to enlightenment. If you didn't know this information, you would still be able to attain enlightenment. But if you're curious about how the Buddha describes the creation of the world, you can understand it through this particular discourse. So it looks like maybe Vibhav has a question, and or you'd like to read the next one.
I did have a small question. I'm sorry, I've not read through the whole thing, so maybe my question is not fully formed. But I think we discussed it before, right? That there are other discourses where Buddha says that, the end of, there's no beginning or end of of the universe, or just where life begins, the life end is not known. It's but here also there is a creation story. So I'm just wondering, and this is also said that in the first paragraph there is the world contracts, and then after that contraction, it tries to expand again. So it kind of goes into almost like the Big Bang Theory kind of discourse. Mm-hmm. So I'm just wondering where how those things two match up with each other.
Yeah. So the undeclared teachings that the Buddha has, he describes how he doesn't teach whether the world is finite or if it's infinite, meaning that this world is going to end at a certain time or that the world goes on for a particular period of time. I think that's what you're talking about. And you might even be also thinking about his discourse where he talks about the beginning of the cycle of rebirth is undiscoverable. And you might be thinking about these two things in relation to this. This is actually different. So when he's talking about the beginning of the cycle of rebirth is undiscoverable, what he's talking about is when the whole cycle of rebirth came about and how it actually came about and, when did it actually come about. When he's talking about the universe, whether it's finite or infinite, meaning that it has a certain set time frame or it goes on forever, the Buddha doesn't teach that. But in terms of the creation of the world and how the world was created, that's a completely different topic than either of these two topics.
So is the creation of the world, that means it's creation of Earth or the creation of the universe, or what does the creation of the world mean in this case? Here
he's talking about the entire world. So we could probably think that during his lifetime, he wouldn't have understanding of the multiple universes and galaxies and the things that we now know about with modern science. He probably would have been talking about the Earth itself.
Okay. And so from what we take from this is that I guess that at some point, it seems for me like this. I mean, let me just read through it again. I can ask more questions.
Okay, sounds good. And then here you can see too that he's talking about the realms as well, right? So it's beyond just the Earth itself. But typically when he's talking about the world, it's typically talking about this world that we live in, meaning the Earth. But then he talks about the other world sometimes. And when he's talking about the other world, he's talking about the realms of existence. But yeah, you reading it first would be wise before asking questions on it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, Samantha, if you'd like to go ahead.
Thank you, Teacher David. Under the explanation for this chapter, what happens to the mind upon death? There's a sentence saying that the new mind will have residual memories of past lives and undistinguished cravings. But some people may not. So I'm just wondering why those memories would not necessarily, be passed on to the next life, to your next form or rebirth.
Yeah, because
some people they are, I understand, but for some people, and I understand there's impermanence, but
that's the reason why. Because of impermanence, not all beings are going to remember it. Not all beings will remember it. So it could be there, but they just don't have the level of insight to be able to see it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, let me see. All right, I don't see any other questions. So this particular discourse, I have a lot here to help you guys understand the process of birth and death. Would somebody like to read chapter 58? Okay, Tonka. Caught your breath now?
Is it the long one?
Let me see. I don't think it is. 1, 2, 3. No, it's about 2.25 pages. That's nothing for you, Tonka.
I'm joking. That's fine. Causes of a decrease in people's lifespan. The king established guard and protection, but he did not give property to the needy, and as a result, poverty became widespread. Thus, from the not giving of property to the needy, poverty poverty became widespread. From the growth of poverty, the taking of what was not given increased. From the increase of theft, the use of weapons increased. From the increased use of weapons, the taking of life increased. And from the increase in the taking of life, people's lifespan decreased, their beauty decreased, and as a result of this decrease of lifespan and beauty, the children of those whose lifespan had been 80,000 years lived for only 40,000 years. Thus, from the not giving of property to the needy, the taking of life increased, and from the taking of life, lying increased. From the increase in lying, people's lifespan decreased. Their beauty decreased, and as a result, the children of those whose lifespan had been 40,000 years lived for only 20,000 years. Thus, from the not giving of property to the needy, the speaking evil of others increased, and in consequence, people's lifespan decreased, their beauty decreased, and as a result, the children of those whose lifespan had been 20,000 years lived only for 10,000 years. Thus, from the not giving of property to the needy, sexual misconduct increased, and in consequence, lifespan decreased, their beauty decreased, and as a result, the children of those whose lifespan had been 10,000 years lived for only 5,000 years. And among the generation whose lifespan was 5,000 years, two things increased. Harsh speech and idle chatter is consequence of which people's lifespan decreased, their beauty decreased, and as a result, the children of those whose lifespan had been 5,000 years lived, some for 2,500 years, and some for only 2,000 years. And among the generation whose lifespan was 2,500 years, craving and anger increased, and in consequence, people's lifespan decreased, their beauty decreased, and as a result, the children of those whose lifespan had been 2,500 years lived for only 1,000 years. Among the generation whose lifespan was 1,000 years, false opinions increased, and as a result, the children of those whose lifespan had been 1,000 years lived for only 500 years. And among the generation whose lifespan was 500 years, three things increased. Incest, excessive greed, and unwholesome practices increased. And as a result, the children of those whose lifespan has been 500 years lived, some for 250 years, some for only 200 years. And among those whose lifespan was 250 years, these things increased. Lack of respect for mother and father, for ascetics and Brahmins, and for the head of the community. Thus, from the not giving of property to the needy, lack of respect for mother and father, for ascetics and Brahmins, and for the head of the community increased, and in consequence, people's lifespan and beauty decreased, and the children of those whose lifespan had been 2.5 centuries lived for only 100 years. Once a time will come when the children of these people will have a lifespan of 10 years, and with them girls will be marriageable at 5 years old, and with them these flavors will disappear: ghee, butter, sesame oil, molasses, and salt. Among them, kudra sagrain will be the chief food, just as rice and curry are today. And with them, the 10 courses of moral conduct will completely disappear, and the 10 courses of evil will prevail exceedingly. For those of 10-year lifespan, there will be no word for moral, so how can there be anyone who acts immoral way? Those people who have no respect for mother and father, for ascetics and Brahmins, for the head of community will be the ones who enjoy honor and prestige, just as it is now the people who show respect for mother and father, for ascetics and Brahmins, for the head of the community who are praised and honored, so it will be with those who do the opposite. Among those of a 10-year lifespan, no account will be taken of mother or aunt, of mother's sister-in-law, or teacher's wife, or of one's father's wives, and so on. All will be promiscuous in the world, like sheep, fowl, and pigs, and dogs, and jackals. Among them, fierce hostility will prevail, one for another, fierce hatred, fierce anger, and thoughts of killing mother against child, and child against mother, father against child, and child against father, brother against brother, brother against sister, just as the hunter feels hatred for the beast he stalks. And for those of 10 years span, there will come to be a sword in interval of 7 days, during which they will mistake one another for wild beasts. Sharp swords will appear in their hands, and thinking, there is a wild beast, they will take each other's lives with those swords. But there will be some beings who do not want to take part in this killing. They went into hiding for 7 days. Then, at the end of 7 days, they will emerge from their hiding places and rejoice together as one community, saying, wholesome beings, I see that you are alive, so let us now do good. And to having undertaken such wholesome things, they will increase in lifespan gradually from 10 years back to 80,000 years again. And in that time, an arahant, fully enlightened Buddha named Maitreya will arise in the world.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So what we've got here is we essentially have a prophecy from the Buddha where he's talking about what is going to occur in the future. And whenever you have a prophecy from someone so long ago, it's never 100% accurate, because the way that an individual can think at that particular time is not necessarily where things are going to end up. So typically a prophecy is maybe 90-95% accurate. In the case of the Buddha, it's about that level of accuracy, where sometimes it's less so, but it's typically never 100% accurate in the way that it's being described. But what he's talking about here is how the ability for humanity to uphold moral conduct gradually declines over time, and the lifespan, meaning the longevity of humanity, shrinks down. When he's talking about beings here, actually he's not talking about beings, but when he's talking about a lifespan of 80,000 years or 40,000 years, he's not talking about one individual being. He's talking about the lifespan of humanity, that at one time it would have been 80,000 years, and then it shrunk down all the way to 10 years, which is essentially where we're at now. If you look at what he's talking about here and about some of these things that he's talking about, where people are essentially honoring people who are unwholesome and doing unwholesome things, and he's talking about this lifespan of humanity being 10 years. I think that's kind of like people talking about like over the next 10 years, based on what we do with the climate, is going to determine the longevity or lack thereof of humanity, things like that, where he's talking about killing family members and things like this. But ultimately what he gets to in this prophecy is that there's going to be a fully enlightened Buddha that arises in the world. And this individual is referred to as Maitreya. This word Maitreya means loving kindness. So this future Buddha that is predicted to come into the world would have a significant amount of loving kindness for the world. So you guys are welcome to ask questions on this if you like. It's one of those things where the Buddha is just talking about what is going to occur in the future. And you're welcome to ask any and all questions that you like, understanding that it's not going to be 100% accurate in the way that he describes or any other person might describe it. So it looks like Samantha might have a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Teacher David. I have a couple. Under the explanation, will Maitreya Buddha not share with the public that he is a Buddha? So I understand that this is not 100% accurate, as you said, but there is a possibility, given the math and whatnot, that there was an awakening of Maitreya around 2017. So potentially we have the Maitreya amongst us now. Is that correct?
Yes, that's true.
Okay. And would the Maitreya know that he was, as the enlightened one knew that he was enlightened?
Yes.
Okay. And then my last question, given the time between the Gotama Buddha and Maitreya Buddha, would the Maitreya Buddha maybe find some new teachings that are different, or that could be expounded upon Gotama's, just given the fact that we've had so much time passed, maybe more technology, things that might be added to Buddha's teachings? Not that anything needed to be changed or subtracted, because everything's been investigated and confirmed, but would the new Buddha perhaps have new teachings that would be more helpful for the, I don't want to say the modern world, but the time has passed between the two?
Yeah. So what the Buddha did 2,500 years ago is he described these natural laws, and what he described as these natural laws would lead to somebody's enlightenment during his lifetime and any time after his lifetime. What has transpired over the last 2,500 years is, because of impermanence, there's been a slow degrading of the quality of the teachings of the Buddha that exist in the world. So less and less people understand what those teachings are. But what's going to lead to a person's enlightenment today are the same things that's going to lead to their enlightenment 2,500 years ago. But because the resources and ability to understand those teachings have slowly degraded, this new Buddha would need to be able to restore the teachings, what Gautama Buddha taught, but restoring them in a way that they could now last the rest of humanity. That's essentially what people think about Maitreya Buddha, is that he's going to restore the teachings of the Buddha back into humanity in a way that the entire world can now create essentially heaven on earth, and based on Gautama Buddha's teachings. But because Gautama Buddha's teachings, like for example in the Pali Canon, as of the year 2017, were in such disarray, this new Buddha would need to be able to understand the teachings independent of the actual resources that exist today. Because the resources that exist today in 2017 were not in a very good shape and very good, usable order. But even if they were, let's say if they were in pristine shape, somebody wouldn't be able to just read those teachings and get to enlightenment anyway. So with the teachings having 2,500 years of impermanence and being in disarray, Maitreya Buddha would need to have gotten to enlightenment and be able to see what the true teachings are, and then see the condition of the teachings of the Buddha, and now clarify them in a way that is going to lead people to enlightenment today. But that clarification that they're doing is the same thing that the Buddha did 2,500 years ago. It's the same exact teachings. It's just that Maitreya Buddha is lifting them up from this disarray, restoring them back into shining in the world in the way that they did during the lifetime of the Buddha.
So Gautama Buddha's teachings were basically perfect, and then with time degraded with impermanence and whatnot. And so restoring that, Maitreya doesn't, like, there's no need to add to that because the teachings were perfect to begin with.
Yeah, there's no additions or subtractions to the teachings. It's just more a matter of using like modern analogies, right? Like the Buddha would have used farming and animal care and carrying water back and forth to the well and not being attached to your axe and your hammer and stuff like this. Where today, you know, Maitreya Buddha might talk about mobile phones and your car and things like this, but it's the same underlying.
Chocolate cake.
It's what's that?
Chocolate cake.
Yeah, chocolate cake. It's the same underlying problems, right? So it's not like the Buddha taught that craving is the cause of discontentedness. It's not like Maitreya Buddha is going to be like, oh yeah, it's not craving actually. It's something else that's causing this. Because it's the same underlying teachings. It's just like applying it to modern day objects that exist.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay. I don't see any other questions anywhere. So I'm going to move on to the next chapter. This is chapter 59. Would someone like to read this? This one's only a page and a little bit. Okay, Keely, go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Teacher David. Become unrighteous. Monks, when kings are unrighteous, the royal subordinates vassals become unrighteous. When the royal subordinate vassals are unrighteous, Brahmins and householders become unrighteous. When Brahmins and householders are unrighteous, the people of the towns and countryside become unrighteous. When the people of the towns and countryside are unrighteous, the sun and moon proceed off course. When the sun and moon proceed off course, the constellation and the stars proceed off course. When the constellation and the stars proceed off course, day and night proceed off course. When day and night proceed off course, the months and weeks proceed off course. When the months and weeks proceed off course, the seasons and years proceed off course. When the seasons and years proceed off course, the winds blow off course and at random. When the wind blows off course and at random, the deities become upset. When the deity are upset, sufficient rain does not fall. When sufficient rain does not fall, the crops ripen irregularly. When people eat crops that ripen irregularly, they become short-lived, ugly, weak, and sickly. Then the Tathagata explained in the above in detail, with the opposite causes with the opposite result. Monks, when kings are righteous, the royal subordinates vassals become righteous. When sufficient rain falls, the crops ripen in season. When people eat crops that ripen in season, they become long-lived, beautiful, strong, and happy. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So this is a discourse that is connected to the one before, where you can see how the conduct that we have affects certain results that we experience in terms of being unrighteous, leading to sickliness, right? The Buddha is showing this cause and effect all the way through that leads to a change in weather, that leads to a change in ability to acquire food that's going to sustain health. And then he talks about the opposite side, that when individuals are righteous, then what it leads to is this long life, right? So the Buddha is a master showing this cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect here. So let me know if you guys have questions on this particular chapter. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere. So now we'll go to the last chapter for today. This is chapter 60. Would someone like to read this one? This one's less than a page. Okay, Keely, go ahead, ma'am.
Reasons for depopulation. Master Gotama, I have heard of older Brahmins who are aged burdened with years, teachers of teachers, saying, "In the past this world was so thickly populated one would think there was no space between people. The villages, towns, and capital cities were so close that roosters could fly between them. Why is Master Gotama that at present the number of people has declined? The population is thin, and villages, towns, cities, and districts have vanished. At present, Brahman, people are excited by unwholesome lust, overcome by unrighteous greed, affected by wrong harmful teachings. As a result, they take up weapons and slay one another, hence many people die. This is a reason why at present the number of people has declined. The population is thin, and villages, towns, cities, and districts have vanished. Again, at present people are excited by unwholesome lust, overcome by unrighteous greed, affected by wrong harmful teachings. When this happens, sufficient rain does not fall. As a result, there is a famine, a scarcity of rain. The crops become spoiled and turn to straw. Hence, many people die. This is another reason why at present the number of people has declined. The population is thin, and villages, towns, cities, and districts have vanished. Again, at present people are excited by unwholesome lust, overcome by unrighteous greed, affected by wrong harmful teachings. When this happens, the yakas, indigenous ethnic group from the Indian subcontinent, released wild spirits, hence many people die. This is yet another reason why at present the number of people has declined. The population is thin, and villages, towns, cities, and districts have vanished. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Keely. So whenever a Buddha exists in the world basically comes to a law. It comes to a low point in society and humanity in the way that individuals are functioning in terms of unwholesomeness. So you can see the Buddha talking about that during his lifetime, that, people had kind of come to a very low point in terms of their unwholesomeness, their lust, overcome by unrighteous greed and having teachings that were harmful. Right? There were certain teachings that were being shared during that time frame, like people were hanging themselves upside down from trees, they were laying on beds of nails, they were piercing their bodies with metal implements, starving themselves, thinking that this was going to lead to enlightenment. People were being taught that rites and rituals and ceremonies of worship and prayer is going to lead to a better life. So there's all these harmful teachings in the world that were harming people's minds because they weren't cultivating wisdom of what truly leads to living a better and better life. So a Buddha coming into the world will come into a world of disarray, of unwholesomeness. And now a Buddha is going to essentially start to share the teachings in a way that shine in the world to bring in more and more wholesomeness into the world. So the Buddha's talking and answering this question of the student who's asked, why do populations decline? And the Buddha's giving that cause and effect. Everything that he's teaching is showing you this cause and effect and helping you to be able to see why any particular thing occurs. And here he's talking about the depopulation of people is coming from this unwholesome lust, this being overcome by unrighteous greed, and these wrong, harmful teachings that are in the world. So here, this is the Buddha helping you to see that cause and effect. So any questions here on this chapter? Okay. I don't see any questions anywhere. So I'm just going to end class by thanking all of you guys for joining. Thank you for reading. Thank you for asking questions. Thank you for just being in class and participating. Whether you're watching this live or you're listening to the replay, I really appreciate your dedication to learning and practicing these teachings. Next week, we're going to be in the next 10 chapters, chapters 61 through 70. So if you'd like to read those ahead of time, you're more than welcome to do so. And then we'll study them in class. And as you see, we're not going to be able to study every single chapter in the same level of detail as is described in the books. So it's recommended that you read the chapters and you read the content from me to help you to be able to reflect on this and gain a deeper understanding of what it is that the Buddha is teaching you. Tomorrow in our group learning program, I'm going to be in chapter 3 of our book, Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment. That's the program that really helps people to get started and get a really good foundation of the teachings of the Buddha. Chapter 3 is titled Enlightenment. What is enlightenment? This is where you can learn about what is this mental state. So that way you can more easily navigate your way to it, and you'll know that you've actually attained it once you've attained it. And then, of course, we have various courses and retreats going on all throughout the months and years. On Monday, I'm going to be starting a Harmony and Relationships course. And then on Wednesdays, of course, I teach meditation and open up to questions you guys have. So you guys are welcome to look at our website for all the learning opportunities that you have available to you. So take care and be well. Perhaps I'll see you guys in a future class. Be well. We'll see you next time. Sawadee-ka.
Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.